How does a world transform when it joins the Imperium? In what way is the first hive built? How are people forced to move around to be relocated to suit the Imperium's plans? How does it grow with investment and people and trade? And an ever-growing populace? Friends, let's find out, and welcome to another 40k video. For our first example, we go to Fallen Angels and the planet Caliban, homeworld of the Primarch, the Lion L. Johnson, Lord of the First. It starts with a hive. The North Wales arcology had been built according to the standard imperial template. It was an irregularly stepped pyramid, even still in its initial stages. It was first 5 kilometres wide at its base and rose more than 3 kilometres high into the cloudy sky. Narrow streets radiated away from the arcology across the plain, surrounded by hundreds of smaller buildings that had yet to be subsumed by the structure's ever-expanding footprint. Each arcology was constructed in a similar fashion on newly compliant imperial worlds. First would come the labourers and their families, relocated by the tens of thousands from towns and villages all over the hemisphere. They would be resettled in a town at the site of the new arcology, which was spread outward in all directions as its population swelled. Then, once there was a large enough labour pool that had been sufficiently trained to begin work, the digging of the arcology's foundation would begin. The structure would grow in stages, expanding outwards, upwards and downwards. At the same time, little by little, the arcology would swallow up the town, its residents progressively reassigned to districts inside the structure itself. The population would continue to grow as well, along with the civil services and the bureaucracy that went along with it. In theory, the population and organisational growth would match the growth of the structure so closely, but by the time the structure was complete, the arcology would be fully populated and self-sufficient. Of course, such things rarely ever went precisely according to plan. How many people are at North Wales these days? Sahariel asked. You mean civilians? About 5 million, all told, Morton replied. About a quarter of that are imperial citizens from off-world, administratum officials, engineers, industrial planners and the like. Sahariel consulted facts and figures committed to memory before leaving Alderuk. A stage 1 arcology is built to support twice that number, he observed. So half of the structure is still unoccupied? Morton shrugged. The Imperium's industrialisation plan called for 20 stage 1 arcologies across Caliban, but the planet's population won't be able to support that for some time yet. The librarian frowned thoughtfully. That seemed like a great deal of extra work. One would think that they would build new structures as needed rather than all at once. Morton spread his gnarled hands. What can I say? The administratum has its reasons, I don't doubt. How is the population distributed throughout the arcology? Sahariel inquired. We're keeping the natives penned into the lower levels, the general rasped. The garrison, the administratum infrastructure, and the off-world residents are housed on the upper levels, where we can keep them secure. So clearly, even at an early level, they're building in that hierarchy, so that the people of the Imperium are at the top, and even those of Caliban are at the bottom. So that inbuilt rivalry is already there. Now from Calgar's siege, we see how a small colony can go from that to a place that houses millions. And there's a little crossover in terms of what happens, but you'll see. Zaladar is a colony, and the world was a backwater colony, upon which a few thousand settlers struggled to hack a living out of the jungle. Contact with Ultramar was intermittent, and life was harsh. After 31 years, they gained a planetary governor. In time, the city grew, as more settlers arrived from all over the eastern fringe, and the beasts of the jungle had been thinned out by bloody, killing drives. Something like a true economy had become established, as opposed to the barter markets of old. The years went by, and they hacked farmland and towns out of the Tagus, and tried to attract as many settlers and colonists as they could to Zaladar, for they needed people above all else. That was manpower and money, the pillars of success. Zaladar had been largely left alone after that, a forgotten frontier world that had escaped the heavy tithes levied on long-established planets further to the galactic west. This oversight had allowed private enterprise to thrive to a surprising degree on an otherwise primitive world. This continued when Ferdia Rosquin made planetfall with a shuttle-load of clerks to set up a branch of the first bank on the planet. With loans taken out from Rosquin's bank, they had brought in heavy machinery and materials, paid Vanaheim's construction company to begin the circuit of Zelathra's tall walls. It seemed far too long back then for the population within, and dug the foundation of Alphen's spire. So hear that line. They seemed far too long back then for the population within. That very much mirrors what happens on Caliban. Not because they needed to build upwards for lack of space, it was to make a statement, and Zalathras began at last to assume the trappings of a genuine city. The Vanaheim's father and sons were the richest conglomerate on the planet. They had financed the building of Kalgat's spire on the condition that they would have a veritable palace of their own on top of it. Only 10 years on the world, they owned a shipping company that dominated all trade between Zeladar and the other scattered planets of the eastern fringe. Their patriarch, Graham Lascelles, had only been seen on Zeladar once, back when the foundations of the spaceport had been laid. Perhaps he cut a ribbon or something like that to open it up. Without his expertise and advice, Fennec doubted that the spaceport would have been built at all. Inevitably, it was going to be named after him. Lascelles Landing, they called it, down in the lower city. And the name had stuck, and the rise continued for Zalathras. How many millions toiled in those high spires or down in that tawny sea? More than at the last census by far. Now that the spaceport was finished, they came almost daily, in creaking shuttles from Lax and Espandor, and in doubles even from the agri-worlds, Quintan, Tarentus, Massali, places long tamed and civilized. To this world, green, steaming Zeladar, this barely polished gem of a planet on the eastern fringe beyond Ultramar, almost beyond the bounds of the Imperium itself. A place that had been nothing more than a wilderness a generation before, but was now on the brink of full Imperial compliance. So you can really see how they can turn around these small worlds very, very quickly. Most of the backbone of the workforce was from the Zeladari system itself. They came because they were restless or discontented, or they sought a wider horizon, a new challenge. Well, they got it here. Others were indentured workers brought in by the thousand to fulfill labour quotas, the grist that was ground in the mill of the burgeoning Zeladari industries. 4 million inhabitants at the last census, 10 years ago. There must be double that now in Zalathras alone, Fennec thought, savouring the number in his mind. We're on the brink of great things on Zeladar. One day we might even rival Lax for production, if only we can keep up the pace. The building crews worked in shifts round the clock. His people needed housing. The shanty towns that they had once hacked out of the jungle were a mere memory now. Now Zalathras was a city, a true city, with high walls and paved streets and thrumming manufactoria. At last, the labour disputes were ended, brought to a close by the iron fist of the Zeladari militia, which now patrolled orderly districts of true citizens. So dense was the population that the walls could barely encompass it, so they had begun to build upwards more and more, rather than let the city sprawl beyond the defences. The house fires grew day by day, so that the tallest of them lost their lofty heads in clouds when the rains came. The Imperium was rising up here in all its glory. All that in 30 years. So let me know what you think to this lore and the really quick way that a small place can grow to have its own hive, which is the first of many, no doubt. And if you like this lore on 40k, then why not try this one? And if you want a load of lore videos on 40k, I've got 2 playlists on the channel. One has everything and one covers the dark age of technology. So enjoy.